Thank you very much. Welcome to Temple University Japan campus. I'm extremely happy to have David Antoine Malinas, who's kindly agreed to devote his evening to speaking at this event. I'd like to thank Nicolas from the French Embassy who made this possible. And as I always say, brevity is a sort of wit, so I won't bore you with introducing our speakers since you all got the invitation. So he'll speak for about half an hour, and then we'll have our usual Q&A. Just a few things. If you have a mobile phone, put it on vibrate. If you didn't get invited directly from our email list, you can give us your business cards and we'll add you to the list. And also, you're most welcome to make a contribution because these events don't cost you anything, but they cost us something. So you're encouraged to donate $10,000 or $20,000, preferably in cash. So without further ado, afterwards, we'll have Q&A, and I'll explain how the Q&A works. So, David Antoine, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, it's working. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate. I usually I try to know who is in the audience. Do we have students? All right. All right. Okay. Do we have professors? All right. And the rest is people from different background. Airline, all right, so working in the private business. Okay, just to adapt my speech, especially for the students sometimes, it's important to be open. So, one of the first time, maybe the first time I came in Japan, it was in 1995. And one of the first thing I was amazed with was that I met homeless people, and I didn't know that there were homeless people in Japan because in France, at least in the newspapers, we haven't no news about homeless people in Japan, and not only homeless people, but in general about poverty or what was the social condition in Japan, inequality in Japan. So by this time, I was still an undergrad student, and then I decided to work on this phenomenon, on the homeless problem in Japan, because I was in political science. I tried to link this inequality problem, these very poor people that are on the street, with what we are very kind of in Japan, in France, what we like, that is social movement. So I tried to analyze the mobilization of the very poor in Japan, especially the homeless people that were in Shinjuku, and I will explain why. So in doing that, I wanted to confront some ideas. First one was the idea that there was no poverty in Japan. So because of the homeless, we could see with our eyes that we had a poverty problem. But usually in Europe and also in Japan, it's like an iceberg. You have the top, but the problem is much wilder. And in Japan, you know that you have a lot of precarious workers, non-regular workers. It's 35-40%. And you also know maybe that in Japan we have a very high poverty rate, about 15%, and it's only second to the USA. So these are some figures to give you a more general background. Another point was that we often see Japanese people as passive. They don't do anything, they accept anything. Instead of what we call voice, instead of arguing, they will silently listen and they will try to escape. And especially in the 90s, that is the decade I analyzed, most of the people that are analyzing social movement, and my teacher was one of them, my beloved teacher, we're talking about the frozen age of social movement, because you had the student movement in the 70s, and in the 80s you had the anti-pollution movement, and then in the 90s it was like everything was dead. And I wanted also to criticize this view by analyzing the mobilization of the very poor and the homeless people. And I had also, and I will be quick on this one, but it's important, there was a theoretical reason I wanted to analyze poverty and poor people mobilization in Japan, First, because Asia in general was not a case study. Japan or China, we had many case studies from Europe and from the US, because the theory was coming from the US and then expanded to Europe. We had very few case studies regarding the theory of mobilization, resource mobilization for Asia and for Japan. And so I wanted to see also if there was a specificity in Japan. And the reason also I chose the very poor, or what we can consider as the poorest, the homeless people, is that in the resource mobilization theory, you need resources to create a social movement, because a social movement has a cost. You need to invest. You need to invest your time. You need to invest knowledge you already have. You need to invest by writing papers, by calling people. And everything has a cost. And when you are talking about homeless people or other categories such as prostitutes or illegal migrants, it's very hard for them to gather these basic resources. So I wanted also to see at the age of the theory what was happening when you try this theory on a very hard field. The choice of Tokyo and Shinjuku, because I will mainly talk about Shinjuku. Most of you know that in the beginning of the 90s, the Tokyo metropolitan government moved to Shinjuku. And the east part of Shinjuku was totally reframed. It became the symbol of the new Tokyo, with the vertical towers and no more the flat Tokyo. And when you analyze the political dimension of the homeless phenomena, Shinjuku is very a central place, because first, Tokyo metropolitan government was very active to recognize in a good sense and in a bad sense. Tokyo metropolitan government was very active to recognize that there was a homeless problem in Tokyo, much before any other cities. First survey, official survey, was in 1995, and it was the Tokyo metropolitan government that produced it. And they were also the first one to have systematic eviction policies toward homeless people that were in Shinjuku, started in 91. First systematic eviction policies. And it's also the first city that started at the end of the 90s, the inclusive policies. They created shelters, they built shelters, and they helped people to move out of the street. And they were, in a good sense and in the bad sense, Tokyo was always the first city to move forward. Shinjuku, in the underground of Shinjuku, so maybe you all know this wonderful place that is Shinjuku Station, this messy place where you have about 2 million people every day that are pouring in and out. And there are so many, all around the station you have so many geography. And the east part is very important regarding the history of the mobilization of the very poor, because the homeless of Shinjuku were the first one to be targeted by Tokyo metropolitan government. We are not talking of a ward level. It was not Shinjuku-ku, it was not Shibuya-ku, it was Tokyo that wanted them out. So very powerful compared to ward level. They were also the first one to be kind of test for the inclusive policy of Tokyo metropolitan government, exactly the same people. And they were also the very unique population, these homeless people, that struggled for more than 4 years. And of course, they were not alone. They had supporters, but they were this very unique population in Japan and regarding the homeless phenomena that struggled for more than 4 years to stay in Shinjuku. Most of the homeless people, they move somewhere else, or they lose the place and they come back, but they didn't want to lose the place, they stayed here. So the reason why this resistance was possible, this opposition was possible, is because these homeless people were not alone. They received strong support from radical left supporters. So, as you know, in Japan, the radical left, so it's after the Communist Party, it's much more on the left. Like you have the Trotskyist and the Maoist and the anarchist and everything that is a kind of reminiscence from the student struggle of the 70s. And all these people, this is very unique in Shinjuku, they hate each other. Well, they hated each other by this time. They never worked together. I mean, when I was still studying Shinjuku, they were killing each other in other places in Japan. But in Shinjuku, all these radical groups, when they decided to cope with poverty, with extreme poverty, they decided to work together. And they worked so much that maybe you've heard about the anti-poverty movement in Japan, the Han Hinkon Netto. The Han Hinkon Net is the result of this little grain that was planted in Shinjuku in the beginning of the 90s and that grew to give birth in 2007 to the biggest lobbying for poor people, the anti-poverty network. So in the details, you might know some names like Yuasa Makoto, that is quite famous. He was in Shinjuku. And all the big names, they were in Shinjuku. So there will be two parts in my presentation. Oh my God. Sorry, the introduction was very long. So there will be two parts. The first, I will focus about the homeless people and then about the supporters. Very easy to distinguish. So first, about the homeless people, give you some rough numbers about who they are. So first, the characteristics. I would compare with Europe, with France, or even in the US. Some are very specific to Japan. So first, in Japan, homeless people are Japanese. It sounds strange, but it's very rare actually. In Europe, in my country, it's hard. We have a rough number, we're not sure, but about 30%, 40% of the homeless people, the people on the street, are not French. They are from another country, and they are most of the time illegal. And in the US also, we have a big number of foreigners. In Japan, it's a national phenomenon. They are Japanese. And if you have a foreigner, they don't know how to cope with that. You have to send him to special organizations that are taking care of foreigners. They don't know how to take care of a foreigner that is a homeless. He has to be sent somewhere else. So I met only 2 foreigners, and it was very hard to help them. They are old people. This is also different from Europe. In Europe, mostly there you have young people in the 20s, 30s, 40s. In Japan, the average is over 50 years old. So, and it's not like you have 60 years old people and 20 years old people, and then you make the average and they are about 40, 50 years old. They are all around 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. So they are all about the same generation of people. They are mostly male, 90%, 95%. No woman on the street. This is something you will find everywhere. When you study rough sleeper in the US or in Europe, you don't have female. They are taken care by the system, by the social welfare. But male, they would go down to the streets. So 90%, 95% in Japan. And a last one is, there are not so many homeless people on the street. Even when it was the highest number, we had about 25,000 homeless people on the street. This is 6 times less than France. And just this number, for example, if you think about San Francisco or some cities in the US, this is just a number that doesn't necessitate any policy or argument or do we have to do something with that? This would be a good number in France. But a characteristic of the homeless people in Japan, though they were not so many, is that they were very visible. You could see them because it was not only a problem of people, it was an urban problem. They were settling on the street. they would create their own house, what we call Damboro house or blue tent. And so they would be very visible in the public space because the blue tent is very visible, and in the underground, because they are protected by they are protected from the rain, you will have cardboard houses. So it was something very visible. Now, as I told you, they quickly, because they were visible, they were people that were angry because they could not use the public space anymore, or they were scared. So they were the target of repressive policies. However, they could not, as homeless people, they couldn't do anything against that. They lack what I call resources. So I will just give you the kind of resources they were lacking to resist the eviction policy. So the first one, that is an obvious one, is it was financial resources. So when you arrive on the street in Japan, most of the time you don't have zero money. This is very hard to be sure, but when you talk with people on the street a long time enough, they will tell you, I had debts. So basically when they arrive on the street, they are minus something, and because they chose to be a homeless, they go back to zero. They don't pay the debts. Okay, they escape the family, they do what is needed, but they go back to zero. So when they are on the street, they are zero. And then they start to live the homeless life, and they start to use the resources they have as the homeless to survive. So they will sell all the recycling industry in Japan, these cans you sell, or these newspapers. So basically every day they could make 1,000 yen, something like that. This is enough to survive for yourself. But this is not enough to create a social movement, You go to the combini and you print pamphlet, and then you don't have money anymore for you. So when you are on the street, and though you are in Japan, this is universal, you become egoist. And this is one of the thing I understood, is that though you have all the cultural background, when you are in such a situation where the only thing you have to do is to think about yourself to survive, you become very rational, and you think almost like an American, because you have to survive and stay alive. The second resource they liked was what I call symbolic resource. It's about the image of homeless people. There is no empathy for homeless people in Japan, though we can argue later, but there is no empathy for Japanese people per se. They have a bad public image. It's very hard to receive support as homeless people. There is actually only one opinion poll that was made, and the major image people had regarding homeless people were that they were stinking, kusai. And the second was that they were lazy. And the third one was they were scary. It's not good when you want people to help you to defend yourself. But when I talked with homeless people, I discovered also that they don't like each other. You have different category of homeless people, and some are settlers, they will stay always at the same time, and some are movers, they will go around. And the movers, they were the minority, but when I was talking with them, they would tell me, settlers, they are real homeless people. I'm not real homeless people. Because me, I move, but they don't move, So they really want to be on the street, but me, I don't want to really be on the street. So there were also this difficulty to create a community identity, an identity for everybody, together, everybody, when people are already arguing who is the real one and the fake one, and they try to escape the category. And the last one is what I call the cultural resource, that is the know-how. These people, of course, because it's not such a widespread knowledge, they don't know how to manipulate opinion. They don't know how to create a social movement. They don't know how to create an organization. Their history, their background is low education. Through the interviews, they scarcely were involved in any organization or volunteer, so they don't have any experience. So my last point is so this category, these homeless people were the targets of eviction policy. And when you have eviction policy, you can categorize in two. The first one is indirect eviction policy. It means that people are complaining and then the authorities are going to do something. This is indirect. So people are complaining, I have a business, but there is a homeless, please do something. And so the authorities are going to do something. They are going to send a warning, and then they are going to move the car box and the homeless. And then it was a case in Shinjuku, you have direct policies. And this is really related to geography. To give you an example, when you have an international event, like a World Cup or whatever, you need to clean the place all around the baseball field or whatever. It can be temporal. Just at this moment, this place is going to bring many people, and if there are homeless people, it's not good for the image. So you need to put out the image. So when the category of the space is changing, it's getting very hard for homeless people to stay in this space. When it's a marginal space with not so much capital in it, then homeless people can stay in it. And East Shinjuku was exactly this marginal space. You might not recall, but as I read, I saw that before all these skyscrapers, what did you have in Shinjuku? It was water filtration centrals. It was huge. It was all the skyscrapers place was that. It was a really marginal space. Nobody wanted to invest over there. It was a property of Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and you already had homeless people around because nobody would bother them. It's called what David Snow is calling it's a marginal space. Nobody's bothered about this space. Homeless people can stay there. And then you have all the reconversion of this space that happened up to the beginning of the 90s when Tokyo Metropolitan Government was moved in the center of this space, that international Japanese company moved their headquarters over there, that international hotel moved their building over there. And suddenly, east part of Shinjuku Station became the most luxurious international place. I don't have time I want to give this detail. You know, in Japan, you always have electric lines. In Shinjuku East, you don't have electric lines. They are all under. It was made to be beautiful for the elite. Everything is underground. You can see the sky, you can see everything. And when you go from the station to the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, there is a long underpath. And in this underpath, there were so many homeless people, and it was impossible to keep them there because now this is a central space, and this is not a place for homeless people. So Tokyo Metropolitan Government, they evicted these homeless people from 1991 strongly and stronger and stronger. And in 1994, in the beginning, in February, they decided to swap away all these homeless people, take them away. And so there were about 100 people, and they took them away. They thought it would be finished. But at this very moment, supporters gathered in Shinjuku. It was unexpected, but people that were taking care of the homeless people in other area of Tokyo, they heard about this problem, and they were very professional as activists, and they thought this is the struggle we have to be in. And two groups gathered in Shinjuku because of this eviction in 1994, and they stayed until almost a decade to support the homeless people. So I have about 5 minutes to talk about these two groups. I'm not sure I can do it, but I will give you a rough idea about these two groups, and then we can talk a little bit about it. The first group is very interesting. It's a lot of actually radical left people that managed to work together for a long time and against all the idea we have about the radical left in Japan. And they were part of a movement called Yoseba movement. They were activists in Yoseba. So what is Yoseba? Yoseba is a place where undeclared day workers can find a job. This is really the origin of the name Yoseba. You can street corner society. You find somebody, a contractor, for one day, and then you go. Some of its places got famous. They got bigger, and they became permanent places for day labor workers. So it means that they were finding job there. You had hotels, you had a restaurant, and it became cities inside the cities. So you have the Yoseba. So now, most of the time when we called it Yoseba, it's this all-together city where you have day labor workers. You have the Yoseba of Sanya in Tokyo, that is northeast. And then you have the one in Osaka, that is in the southeast also. And over there you have day labor workers, and they are undeclared. So how do they find job? So they find job directly with people that want to hire them, or most of the time there is a Yakuza somewhere. If it's not undeclared, there is somewhere a Yakuza. So you have various Yakuza, but if you are undeclared and you work on the territory in Japan, all Japanese territory is Yakuza. So you have to pay. If it's undeclared, you have to pay to a Yakuza gang that is taking care of this territory. And also there is what we call teihaishi, that are middlemen that are going to propose these day labor workers to people that need them. And these people are related also to gangs. So you have all these people that are concentrated in the same area. All this is ruled by the Yakuza, so you don't have law. And it's a very violent place. Sometimes you are not paid. The conditions are very harsh. Sometimes you die. So there is a part of the student in the 70s that were activists that decided to take care of these day labor workers. So they entered these ghettos. It's quite far away. It's beginning of the 70s. They entered the ghettos, decided to live like day labor workers, and to mobilize them to defend their rights. And they did that in the 70s, in the 80s, until the beginning of the 90s. But in the beginning of the 90s, these day labor workers, they were getting old. And as you know, it was the end of the bubble. All these day labor workers, they were working in the construction business. Too old, no more investment in the construction. So actually the first year was 91. In an interview, they told me it's strange because these day labor workers, because the strong construction business is in cycle, we knew they would be on the street on Christmas and for the New Year, but we thought they would go back to business after, but they didn't. They stayed on the street. This is in 91, 92. And so we thought, wow, there is a new problem here. There are no more workers. There are homeless people, and we have to take care of them as homeless people. So inside these ghettos in Tokyo, these day labor ghettos in Tokyo, in Yokohama, in Osaka, in Nagoya, that are the big ones. These supporters and these activists, they start working for homeless people. And when they saw what happened in Shinjuku, this is very, very rare because all the other activists, if you go in Osaka or if you go in Nagoya, they stayed inside the ghetto. They never went out of the ghetto. But in Shinjuku, in Tokyo, when they saw the eviction in 1994, when they heard about the eviction, they decided to move out of the ghetto and they start living in Shinjuku with the homeless people to mobilize them. The specificity of this organization that is called Sogidan is that they were very good at organizing people. They were very good at community building. They knew how to put people together They knew also how to defend people. And for instance, in Shinjuku, where there was a struggle between authorities or police and the homeless people, these activists would always be at the front line, and the homeless would be behind. They would not have to struggle directly. If they wished, they could, but they were ready to take the risk for the other, and they knew how to defend the community. Very good in community organization, very good in defending a community. So this was the first organization that moved to Shinjuku, and the second one, that is the last one, was very different. So if you know a little bit about the student movement in Japan, I don't know that much, but I had to know about that. At the very end, because of all this struggle between all the students' all the factions, there is a new faction that rose, that was called the non-sector radical. Non-sector radical, they were people that said, they were kind of anarchist. We are not related with any ideology. We don't care about what you think, what you think. We are against the system, but we don't want to build anything after. And it took, their struggle took the form of music, art, happening. Was very new and very different from this other organization. In the and so you have several generations for the 70s, 1890s, and of course they were not in Yoseba. They were not kept alive by the Yoseba struggle. Where they were kept alive was universities. They stayed in universities. This was the place that saved them. And in the beginning of the 90s, they decided to move out the university to take care of undocumented foreigners that were in Hibiya Park. So some of them might recall the beginning of the 90s, you had many Iran people that were undocumented workers because they couldn't renew their work visa, and they gathered in Yoyogi Park. A part was called Tehran, Petit Tehran, Little Tehran. And because they were undocumented, they were not evicted. They were sent back to their country, and this trigger fight between a group called Inoken, Inochi Tokeni, so life and rights. And this group, it's very hard to define even as a group. It was a bunch of people that were calling each other to do sometimes some happening, music, but they knew each other. And they decided to be more organized to support these Iran people, undocumented Iran people. Beginning of the 90s, Hibiya Park. They lost quickly because all of the Iran people were sent back to their country. But then, instead of stopping all their action, they decided in 1994 to move to Shinjuku because they heard of this struggle in Shinjuku. And as they recall, or through the interview that I wrote down, they lost the first time against the authorities because they couldn't save these undocumented workers, and they wanted to save the homeless people in Shinjuku to help them to survive on the street. So they moved in Shinjuku, and suddenly, and at first they didn't work together, but quickly they worked together. You had, for the first time, all the radical left in Japan that was at the same place. Until now, they had different spaces. Some would be in the northeast of Tokyo. The other one would be in Shibuya in the south. And for the first time, for 30 years, all these groups that were killing each other or ignoring each other, they would work together in Shinjuku. And what the strength of the Inoken As I told you, they were doing art and happening. They were very strong to activate bystanders and to manipulate media, how to attract media attention. This kind of knowledge, the people from the Yoseba movement, they didn't know how to do that. Actually, they hated that. They didn't like the light of the media. They liked things that were a little bit secret. And of course, because of the Yakuza struggle, if you bring a camera, it would be dangerous. As you know, the only documentary that was made in regarding the Yoseba of Sanya in Tokyo, it was made by 2 militants and they were killed. So they were reluctant to use the media, and they didn't. They were not very good to activate bystanders. But this other group from Shibuya was very strong in doing that. They knew how to activate bystanders and to work with media. So this is how all this group gathered in Shinjuku gave birth to what was called at first the Shinjuku Renrakukai. So it was just the group of Shinjuku that is together. Later, because the homeless phenomenon was not only a problem in Tokyo, they created the National Network for Homeless People all around Japan. And because the homeless people was not only a political problem, because people on the streets have problem with health, or they have problem with, as I told you, debt, they gathered other people. They gathered doctors, nurses, lawyers, volunteers. And all these people worked together to support homeless people. And so basically this is all I have to say about this movement and how it started and developed in the 90s.
Thank you very much. So the way it works, if you have a question, you can either come up to the mic, in which case you will be recorded and video recorded, or if you want to remain anonymous, you can just speak from the floor, and therefore your voice will not get into our electronic systems. So whoever has a question? Yes.
I'll be recorded.
Okay.
My name is Charles McJilton. I'm with Second Harvest Japan. I actually lived in Sanya from 91 and lived with the homeless from 97 to 98 along the Sumida River. So I can speak about the eviction that was quite different than Shinjuku, but one thing I'd like to affirm that you got right was that there are really two types of people who are homeless, those who chose to build a house and those who didn't. And you hit spot on that those who build a house kind of consider themselves to be homeless. Those who didn't said, well, I'm just in between jobs and stuff like that. 2 points of clarification. One, there wasn't a unified leftist movement in Shinjuku. Within Sanya in 95, there was a riot. There was a split between the union because the union felt that their resources were going to Shinjuku to help the people there where they should be staying within Sanya itself. The second thing is when in the 90s, when you look at the homeless issue, you have to think of it geographically. Up in Sanya, they didn't call themselves homeless. They were former day laborers. People in Shinjuku some were day laborers, some were not. They came from Takanobaba, or we call new homeless, people who were fresh off the streets. And in Shibuya were Inochiken, which was actively involved at one time, again, a different type of people. And so people identified geographically who they were and where they came from. And so even in Japanese, the word homeless within Sanya was not used. Seikatsu rojo seikasha, so people living on the street. And so I know that, and it's not no thing to you, that gets lost in the translation sometimes when we go from Japanese to English, but in Japanese itself, there is a big difference between using the word homeless and rojo seikasha. So I just want to make that kind of a clarification there. The last I'd have to say about the Anti-Poverty Network, that I think came out of a few activists who are doing that. And what is interesting about that Anti-Poverty Network, it doesn't include everybody who's part of the anti-poverty movement. And one of the pillars of the anti-poverty part right there is nothing to talk about food security or food safety. And that is in spite of the fact that USSR was in part of the original food bank in 2000. So it's curious that it is not as unified as one may think if they could delve a little deeper. So I just wanted to add those comments. Very good research. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, the 95 riot, when the Sogidan decided to take care of Shinjuku, it was very hard for some people inside the movement to accept that, because and sorry, I use homeless. I will go after with the category, because they were defining themselves as a labor union. They would support workers, and some of the people inside this group said Shinjuku is not our struggle. We are a labor union. We have to stay in Sanya to help people that have problem with their jobs. To help people on the street that are excluded from the market is another struggle. It's not ours. And it was a huge argument. And there was a kind of revolution and counter-revolution inside the Sogidan. The one that moved to Shinjuku were kind of excluded, and then they came back and they excluded the other people, and they kept all the resources of their organization. And they had quite a few, because they had a building, and they had a whole network of organization inside each yoseba of Japan. And it's the Tokyo Sogidan that has to convince the other organizations across Japan that the homeless struggle was worth the struggle. That we should take care of that. But it was actually a very hard, a defining moment. Would we take care of homeless people or not? And you're absolutely right about this riot. The naming of the homeless people is a long story. You have many names, and first they didn't want to be called, or the supporters didn't want to call them homeless people. And it's only much later, at the end of the 90s, that the word homeless was more or less accepted, or at least, as I can recall, when the supporters told me I would use the term homeless. In the beginning of the 90s, I would be booed. There will be an argument. But at the end of the 90s, there was no more argument. People would accept this category. Of course, the name Lojo Seikatsusha and was used too. And actually, it's used also in official survey. So it was becoming equivalent. And one of the sad thing, it's not exactly sad, but they tried to struggle for work, because really at the beginning they wanted jobs for these homeless people, and they got everything from the authorities. They got shelters, then they got apartments, but they never got jobs. The job policy was really particular to Sanya. It was really located. It never became a national policy. And every year, the Shinjuku Renrakukai, this new group, would ask Tokyo metropolitan government for jobs, and they would criticize the fact that there was no jobs for homeless people. But the metropolitan government would always refuse. The anti-poverty network is very interesting, and you notice the role of Yuasa-san. I think Yuasa-san he's not here, so I can talk about him. He's a very unique in the sense that he's a leader, but not in a typical assumption. We think of a leader as somebody that has charisma and is able to gather people. But Yuasa-san was not exactly this type of leader. He was a person that he was in the background for a long time. He was with Food Bank and other groups, but he was not very famous, or he was not um, a person in front in the struggle. He was more in the background because you had other leaders that were killed and or died, and then he moved forward. But what he managed to do is to talk with everybody. He managed to talk with the people that were not from his side, that were people from Sanya, and like people from the Sogidan, and especially Nakamura-san, somebody very important, because he was by this time the older guy inside the Sogidan, and he's still somebody very central. And he talked also, when he created the anti-poverty network, with people that were out of the question for a long time. It was communists. Communists moved toward the anti-poverty movement through various through one organization, that is a labor union for for precarious workers, Seinen Union. Of course, the Communist Party had to change many things to accept that, but he was somebody that was able to network everybody. I think it was his strength. Yeah, that was long, but that's all.
I have a couple of questions. One, I mean, I spent my lifetime back and forth between the United States and Japan. And I don't remember seeing homeless much at all through the 80s. And then I remember being very aware of them from the 90s on. Was there a great increase, or did they just become more visible? Second question is very different. I've been studying for quite some time slum dwellers in late Meiji, so 1890s, early 20th century. And one of the things that I've found is if you do a slice at any time, it looks this way. But if you do a slice across time, they aren't the same people. There's ambition, and people are moving very slowly, but over a generation or two, up and into lower middle class jobs and so forth. Is that typical at all of homeless? I mean, is there ambition to get jobs? Is there evidence of success at that and of mobility at all?
Thank you for your question. Homeless people in the 80s, yes, you had some. For example, in Shinjuku, you had some. And also you have temporarily homeless people that were, that we would not name homeless people, that were on the street because they were these day labor workers from Sanya or Kamagasaki in Osaka. And for example, during the rainy season or during the Golden Week or at the end of the year, they would have no job. And because they had only a few money with them, they would live on the street for a few weeks. Aozora, it was named Aozora. You would stay on the street, and actually you will put the cupboard on you, and they already knew all these techniques. What was very new in the beginning of the 90s is that they couldn't move back to even the cheapest room of these ghettos. And actually the cheapest rooms got much expensive at the end of the 80s because if you see old pictures, this room would be communal rooms. You would have 6, 7, 8 people in the same room with no reverse climatization or whatever. And it was very, very cheap, dirty but cheap. But at the end of the 80s, all the owners of the hotel, they would have invested a lot. And you can see that in Kamagasaki, when you have these hotels were 2 or 3 floors and they moved to 5, 6, 7 floors. A lot of investment, little rooms with some air conditioning and a bath for everybody. Something much better, but much more expensive. So in the beginning of the 90s, you have this crisis with these old people. This will be related to your second question. They entered the ghettos in the 70s, the Yoseba in the 70s, some of them even at the beginning of the 60s. But the interesting thing is that people entered in the 60s, 70s, but so few people are entering after. And you have a generation of people that are growing older in these ghettos. And in the 90s, they turned 50 years old, or approximately 50 years old. And in the construction industry at 50 years old, when you worked your whole life in the construction industry, you cannot work. You are not very valuable compared to young people. And when you have the crisis of the construction industry coming at the same time, they don't find job anyway, and the poor on the streets. So in the beginning of the 90s, you really have a strong visibility and an increase of homeless people. You had about 1,000 homeless houses on the Sumida River, and in Osaka you have Osaka Castle, and all around there were so many new houses that were constructed by homeless people. If they can move upward, this is very hard because in Europe we have people that are young, so intergeneration social uprising is very hard when you are 20, 30 years old and you move up to lower middle class. It might be possible, and you can marry, you can gather capital. But in their case, they are in the end of their life. They are 50 years old, 60 years old. Some of them might be able to work, some might not be able to work. They would have to be taken care of by the welfare system. So the best that can be is that they use the ladder that is constructed has been constructed by the authorities. So you have shelter policy. You enter the shelter, and then they will assess you, and they will give you a room in a place for old people or disabled people, or they will find you an apartment, and you will work half-time, part-time. And there was another policy that was housing first policy that is very specific to Tokyo, where they would offer first the apartment at a very low price, and then the supporters, the volunteers, will help the homeless people to find back the habit of a normal life, like to shut the gas and to shut the door, and then to move forward to find a job, etc. Thank you.
My name is Kurt Sieber. I'm here representing the Austrian Business Council. I had my office in the Shinjuku Park Tower, with the Park Hyatt on top of it, from the mid-1990s to about 2007. And whenever I was looking out of the window from my office, I saw all the blue tents there in the Chuo-koen. And the contrast was kind of, we're having our lunches up there at the Park Hyatt, and with all the luxuries you can think of, and within a very, very short distance, you had this total poverty. So, but that's just a comment. My question is according to the governmental statistics now, 1/6 of the population of Japan is in poverty, and poverty is specified as having less than 50% financial means, income, as compared to the average. So it comes out to something like 1.5 million yen per year. When you now talk of very poor, are there any financial standards there where you would say, well, these people are very poor? And that's my first question. My second question is there any data available why these people became homeless? I mean, there could be all kind of reasons for that. Are there any statistics on that subject, like people getting sick or people getting fired or whatever? I mean, because I think the mobilization, as you mentioned it, would be very much helped with systems if they would kind of restore their perhaps former glory before they ever fell down into that category. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Shinjuku Koen. So it's good because I had no time. I wanted just to talk a little bit about that. The homeless people, they moved to Shinjuku Chuo Koen in 1998. Before they were in this underpath, and there was a second try by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government to evict them in 1996, and they failed. They failed because you had this organization, and this organization were very strong to create a community that would resist, and the other organization was very strong to bring media. So when the homeless were evicted, you had all the national newspapers and you had all the television cameras that were there. And though people were not fond of homeless people, they thought that was disproportionate. That was too much. And you have to remember that we were in the middle of the 90s, so internet, everything was starting. And actually on that very year, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government started an internet communication page where citizens could write their opinions and it would be sent to Tokyo Metropolitan Government. And the opinion that received the most comment was the eviction. Was the highest comment for the whole year. And all the comments were negative. They were saying you did too much, you did bad. And I also went through the national press, and people that were writing in the newspaper their opinion would say, well, that's too much. And so, and you had Tokyo Metropolitan Government election and a new governor. And then after 96, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government decided to change all his way to treat the homeless people. And they decided to work with the supporters and to create inclusive policy. And it was moving very slowly because they each had their interests. It was complicated, it was very slow. But what accelerated everything, and maybe you saw that in the newspapers that year, in 1998 there was a huge fire in the underground, and all the cardboard were burned, and some homeless people died. And so both the supporters and both the authorities decided to do something for these homeless people, and they created the first shelter for homeless people, for these Shinjuku homeless people. And they accepted because Shinjuku Chuokoen is actually the property of Tokyo Metropolitan Government. They had a deal, and the homeless people could leave the underground, the underpath, and move to the Chuokoen, and they will not be evicted if they were in the Chuokoen. That was the deal in 1998. Regarding poverty, there is a growing phenomenon of poverty. I didn't bring the data, I don't have there in my mind, but I actually analyzed the poverty is 50%. As you it's a relative poverty. It's 50% in Japan. We calculate it at 60% in Europe. So it means that if you were using European standard, you would have more than 1 of the 6. You would have more poor people. And when I saw the category that are under this poverty line, this relative poverty line, I was surprised that the majority of them are the poorest. They are on the very left of the graph. They are very, very poor. Poor people are very poor in Japan. I don't have the numbers right now. But I was very surprised by the fact that most of the poor people that are under the 50%, they are really under. They are very poor. And was there another question? Yes, why? Why? So there are 2 reasons, and I can do that very quickly. The first one is the day labor workers. The day labor workers, when they lost their job, they ended on the street. This was very fast. I mean, it didn't took 1 year to 2 years to really take them out of the hotel and put them in the suburb and out of the ghetto. Huge influence because they were all in the construction industry. The bubble is a construction industry bubble, and when it ended, you didn't need all this extra workforce, and they were old, so they were on the street. Now the very strange thing is that after the 11th of March 2011, when I went to Kamakazaki, but maybe in Sanya too, I'm not sure. But in Kamakazaki, when I talked with the supporters over there, I told them I'm surprised because there are less people. There are less people on the street compared to usually. Compared to before 2011. And they told me, yeah, because there is all the reconstruction and all the pollution, nuclear pollution that has to be taken care with, and all the teihaishi, all the contractors are coming and they are using these old people. There is a lack of workforce to reconstruct the northeast of Japan, and they are using these previously homeless people one more time as day labor workers on various jobs. Another reason why people were on the street, these day labor workers, it was one path. The other path were people that were included inside the normal society, but at the very, very low level of security. Most of the time they would be working, and the person they would work for will also provide them with a dwelling, a room, or some place to sleep. And so when this is a category by itself, it's very strong. When these people would lose their job, they will also lose the place they live. And they would have to leave the place they live. And so they would end it on the street most of the time. But if they find another job, it would be fine. But then they will consume their money to stay on a hotel or somewhere, and then eventually they will end on the street if they don't find another job. So the fact that Japanese are provided a dwelling, a room, or a place to live, it's very famous for these international companies, and it's the top of the security. But at the very, very low level of the society, you have the same thing. Poor employees, they are very grateful when they can have also a room to sleep, even if it's in the bar or somewhere. But when they lose their job, they also lose the place they were living. So it represents actually out of the yoseba, out of the people that were day labor workers, this was a very strong. This was a very strong influence. It represented about 30 or 40% of the people that were on the street that lost their job and lost their place and ended on the street.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your lecture. Well, I thought, it should be strange if if no Japanese speak up, after many foreigners spoke here. Well, I was very ignorant, and I haven't realized that there are many foreigners who has such concerns and interest in this issue, and I pay respect to ICAS, who sponsors this kind of meeting. And I, of course, I'm very grateful to the foreigners who has so much interest and concerns. Now, I'm more concerned about a kind of apathy towards these people. These days in Japan, under the Abenomics, and people tend to think people who are marginalized or at the fringe, are not to be cared about. And I'm concerned about this kind of general tendency among Japanese who don't have much concerns or interest in such a phase. And so this is not exactly a question, but this is my feeling. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your comment, and I deeply appreciate it. And I think your English is impressive. I'm ashamed of my English when I hear you. It's not really an answer, but I remember that when I asked for a scholarship, because you say people don't do many things, and so when I decided to study homeless in Japan, so I needed a scholarship, so I applied, and so there was a jury, and so they asked me some tricky question, but it was okay. But at the end, I had a kind of over consciousness, and I told them, of course, I will be very glad if I receive the money for the scholarship and I can study this homeless problem. But at the same time, maybe the money would be better used, not for me, but for homeless people. So, does it worth it to give me the money? So, of course, there are some people that are not doing so many things, but people that are doing things for homeless people, I think among researchers, among activists, of course, they always need to think about the homeless people. It's something you cannot quit, never. So maybe there are not so many people, but they are here for a long time, I think. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for the great presentation. I'm quite new to this field and can't say something very substantial about it, but I'm researching governance. So in the viewpoint of governance, I'd like to ask a bit of question. The first thing is about the general political situation in Japan, in which Japan used to, I think the support group and could be the homeless group as a whole, and the sentiment of the traditional leftist sentiment until 1980s, I imagine. including the relationship with the Communist Party or the far left party, the groups or something like that. After 1990, this kind of tendency has declined, as everybody here knows as well. The political situation getting chaotic now until today. The opposition party today is not so much consolidated at this moment. What we can say at this from this situation is probably the decline of the traditional opposition, somebody taking over the previous position. Just wondering, what is there some kind of the influence of such kind of mainstream political changes in community or the aid organization communities? The second question is a bit vague, but my personal feeling, which is about the nature of the Japanese society, which used to be very hierarchical, such as the top-down system of the Keidanren companies or the hierarchical bureaucracy or something like that until 1980s. But this kind of governance system has declined and getting not totally dismantled, but getting more complex or could be decade in some way. The situation is more difficult to clearly define. And you said that the aid group has, traditional aid group, old-fashioned one, has declined or reduced their previous role, and the new groups are appearing, but new groups are difficult to define. And just wondering what kind of in particular newer groups had in terms of the hierarchical system also. In a simpler term, are they more flat or something like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your two questions. The political situation in Japan. I totally agree with you about the lack of strength of the opposition, and also what I believe is maybe there is a debate on that, but I believe that civil society also is much weaker than before. And I think I'm thinking of that because of my background and because of my research on poverty. It took about a decade for the authorities to accept that there was a poverty problem in Japan, a homeless problem in Japan. It took more than 10 years for the national government to create policies to accept the lobby from the poverty groups and organizations to support inclusive policies. It was built slowly, and it needed the supporters of the poor people to be together, and it needed also to create pipes with the politician world and also with the media. And it took a long time, because even in the 90s, some journalists were ready to write about homeless, poor people, yoseba, but they will not be published. So it takes a really long time for civil society to be heard. And I believe that what happened with the nuclear catastrophe that happened in Tohoku is that it shaked it shaked not only the population, but it shaked also all this civil society. These groups that were working together because they were thinking of poverty, now there are different issues that are not bringing them together, that are putting them apart. It would take many years to bring them back together on these issues, and I don't know even if it's possible. Another thing is that poverty issue, now you can talk about it. I remember when I started my research, poverty, hinkon, was a word used by communist people. and it means that you were reading Akahata, the red flag. I mean, I had to hide my research at the beginning. I would not say that I'm studying homeless people or that I was talking with radical left people. I mean, my homestay mother, she will kick me out. So I had to hide that. But at the end of, and I started in 2000. In the middle of the 2000, you could talk about poverty in Japan. It was no more something that was hidden. Now the nuclear issue in Japan is a very problematic issue. It's very hard to talk about it. And so it's very hard to create these pipes with the political world. And it's very hard to create these pipes with the media. And everything has to be reconstructed. And it might take another 10 years or 20 years to obtain the same strength we had before 2011, thanks to the poverty issue that managed to bring everybody together. So yes, I think we are in a time of recomposition in Japan regarding civil society and its strength. I don't believe we have a strong civil society. We have a very there is a lot of action all around Japan, but I think it's all fragmented. It's not going in the same direction, and the more you are fragmented, the weaker you are. So it's compared to the before 2011. I believe the situation is much harder for the opposition and for civil society.
Thank you. I'm Elaine Kurtenbach of Associated Press. One of the issues that's come up in my years here has been about how the Olympics might affect the homeless people, and my understanding is that some people are they've already been pushed out of some parts of downtown. I know there's a lot of people who seems more and more along the Tama River, which is where I spend a lot of time. So I'm a little interested in your observations about that, and also about the net cafe thing, because a lot of the people who are not in permanent domiciles are basically having to stay in net cafes. How's that affected the overall situation? I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It certainly keeps people hidden because you don't see them.
Thank you. Sorry, I was not sure to answer now or after, but I will answer now. The situation now is very different than when I studied it. Most of the homeless people now are no more settled. And when they are settled, as you mentioned, it's very far in the suburb when you cannot see them. So in Tama, very far. Or before it was Sumida, but now you have to go very far in Sumidagawa to find some settlements. So the homeless people that are in the center, of course you have remains because there was an agreement between authorities and supporters group that you should not destroy the existing houses of homeless people. But when the person die, you can take it out and nobody will rebuild a house. This is a deal. And everybody agreed on that. But the consequence is that the new homeless people cannot settle on the ground anymore, and they have to be always in movement. Because of that, compared to previous big events, in this Olympics, of course, you have some problems with people that would be displaced, but it's much less visible than before. Because the geography of homelessness has changed, and because also you have less, and in number you have less and less homeless people, as I mentioned, because of the 2011 events. The net cafe is a huge problem. I believe it's a huge problem. I don't know if I'm really answering as a researcher, but also as a researcher. It's very easy to talk with homeless people. It's really easy to find homeless people because they are on the street. Even if they move, you will always find them. Net cafe, it's very hard because it's a commercial place. You cannot interview. You need to ask permissions, and it's very hard to know where they are. And basically, they are hidden. and it's created a lot of problem with finding them, knowing how many there are, and also problem of health. It's really a health issue. There is a huge health issue with that. Net cafes is a big problem. I really appreciated when we had the what was called the Hakemura in 2008. At the end of 2008, Hakemura gave publicity to this problem of these people that we don't know where they are, but there were so many that actually so this is the irony. The Ministry of Work and Welfare had to open its doors to these workers, because in the Hakemura, so it's an event at the end of 2008, because at the end of the year all the welfare offices are closed in Japan, and so the volunteers created this huge village in Hibiya. I think it was in Hibiya Park, and they were expecting something like 300 people or 500 people, and something like the double of the number came, and so they negotiated with the welfare minister, work and welfare minister, to open the doors, and this gave a bright a light on this problem. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a very brief question. I wondered, there was, well, maybe Japanese culture has some influence on this issue, and I wondered, were there any aspect very unique to Japanese people on the street comparing with other people in other countries?
Thank you very much. It was actually hard to find some specifics. I give you the result of a poll where homeless people were considered as disgusting. But during my fieldwork, and when I read the result of other researcher fieldwork, I found out that the reality was much more complex. And basically, people don't like homeless people when they are in their background. In their background, it's like a NIMBY problem, not in my backyard. So you are very ready to support homeless people as far as the shelter is not going to be constructed just next to your house. When I was interviewing homeless people of Shinjuku, but in other places too, I saw a lot of, I heard a lot of stories where they could receive food from a convenience store, or they knew this guy that was working at McDonald's and they would receive hamburgers. And they had also this deal with the people that were the security of department stores, because you have the department store that is going up to here, and this is public space. So if you're on public space, the police will come and ask you to go out. But if you are on the private space of the department, the police cannot ask you to leave. So during the eviction policy, they will always try to find the place near the department store and say, no, I'm not disturbing the public space. So they would live in front of Honyasan or a little place like that. And there is a lot of this little cooperation every day that will help the homeless people to survive. So I believe this is very maybe universal, that human people are schizophrenic, depending on the level they think. If they see somebody in need, they will help him. But at the same time, if he is near his house, they would not like to help him. And you have to deal with that. And I don't know if it's unique, and I don't know if it's Japanese, because we know that we had homeless phenomena before, and they were monogoi, they were begging, they were beggars. You had beggars in Japan. I mean, until the 70s, 物乞いする人という形がありましたんですけれども、そういう人がいた。But it's true that the homeless people of the 90s, they don't beg. And this is very different from what we have in Europe and in the US. But I don't know why specifically the homeless people, I have some hypothesis, but I don't know why specifically all the homeless people starting in the 90s, they don't beg. Though we know we had beggars before and up to 70s in Japan, and we have religious beggars in Japan also. So, but there is very specificity of Japanese homeless that are not beggars.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
May I once more? I have a follow-up question. The latest statistics say that the unemployment rate in Japan now is at an almost absolute low, and it is very close to the figures we had in the early 1970s. Would you say, and of course we have the Olympic boom going on, and the main shortage of labor is in the construction industry, among others. So would you say that the problem, or how do you judge the situation as of today? Is there any improvement going on in that direction? That's my question. And I have one more comment, something positive. Has anybody heard of, among the people here, about second harvest?
I'm the founder.
That's why I raised it. I think we should really recognize this fantastic work which has been done by Second Harvest, and starting at the beginning, well, perhaps 10 years ago or so, I remember they had about a few food companies who were donating excess food, or perhaps food which was shortly before the expiry date and so on. And recently he has been making a presentation at the Foreign Correspondents Club, and they're now working with about 1,100 food companies who are contributing to their purpose, and also they have taken a fantastic job in helping with the Tohoku crisis. What still I remember is they were the first ones to bring 800, 900 tons of food to Tohoku before any of the other big organizations started to get moving. So thank you so much for having done all this work, and I think we need to give him a hand.
So thank you very much, David Antoine. We're extremely happy to have had you. I don't know if you want to say a few words to conclude, or...
No, thank you very much for your invitation. There was just before the applause, there were a question from the gentleman regarding the low employment rate. The deal in Japan since Koizumi is we will not have unemployment, but we will have non-regular workers. This is the deal in Japan. We didn't make this deal in Europe. In France, we have high unemployment rate. We try to preserve the quality of work. They had another situation. They had another leader. He found the best thing was to lower the employment rate that was rising to 5%. It was very important according to them. And the solution was non-regular workers. And you see a huge increase from 2002 of Haken, and of another category that we forget because Haken is not so many people. The other big category is people over 60 years old that still have to continue to work. And this is also a huge and important population that is sometimes in dire situations. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, David Antoine. I'd like to thank again Nicolas for making this possible. I'd like to thank all our student workers, and also Emily, who's recently joined our staff as one of the coordinators. So thanks again.